You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. We have a very special first-time co-host today, Guinevere Porter. Hi, Guinevere.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So in a few minutes, we're going to listen to an interview about Bodie Island Lighthouse in North Carolina. First, I want to tell everyone a little bit more about today's co-host. Our listeners might recall that a couple of weeks ago, we wished Guinevere a happy birthday on the podcast. So I think your actual birthday was just a few days ago. Is that right, Guinevere?
It was Saturday. Yes, it was.
And how old are you now?
I am 11 years old now.
Well, congratulations. Happy belated birthday. So also joining us today is Guinevere's mom, Heather Porter.
Hey, Jeremy.
Thanks so much to both of you for doing this today. So Heather, you first contacted me back in September to ask me if I could wish Guinevere a happy birthday on the podcast. You said you both listen to the podcast on a regular basis. Is that right?
Yeah, I've listened to every single one. Gwen's listened to every one that she's been to, at least.
Okay. Cool. That is amazing to me that you've listened to every one. I don't think there's a whole lot of people out there who can say that. So I really appreciate that. It's always amazing to me when I find out people actually listen to it. You know, sometimes I'll meet somebody and say, I listened to the podcast. I never get over being surprised when I hear that. So thank you so much for listening.
Oh, yeah.
And I was very happy that you contacted me about this. You know, we're always trying to figure out how to get younger people interested in lighthouses. By younger, I kind of mean under 65, because so many of us in the lighthouse world are, getting up there a little bit in years. My feeling is that if you get a kid to visit a lighthouse, they'll probably love the experience. So Guinevere, can you remind me where you guys live?
Oh, we live in Kentucky.
Okay. So you're a ways from the ocean, right? I was looking on Google Maps. You're a few hundred miles from the ocean, right? Is that about right? Yeah. So how did you get so interested in lighthouses?
I got into it because we visited when I was a kid. My mom, we went to the beach. She would always take us to the ones that were closest. Mm-hmm. And I just thought climbing them was fun. And I thought they looked really cool. And then as a grown up, I just kind of ended up liking them more. Just thought they were really pretty. And I loved the history in them. So then I started taking them to everyone, even if it wasn't so close, like even if it was a little out of the way on vacations. And then I started taking her, from the time before she was able to walk. So she kind of had to love them, I think.
What was the first lighthouse when she was like 6 months old? Where was that? Ocracoke, yeah, which I just visited a couple of months ago for the first time, or a month or so ago. Yeah. So you were 6 months old the first time you visited a lighthouse, Guinevere. You probably don't remember a whole lot about that, I would imagine. Yeah. What's the first one you actually remember visiting?
So after the first one I went to, we had to take a break from seeing lighthouses for a little bit because then she got pregnant with my brother. Then we stayed home for a little bit. And then this summer we went on a vacation and we saw six lighthouses. Yeah. So that's the most recent one that I remember.
What area was that in where you saw the 6 lighthouses?
Florida or Georgia?
And Georgia.
Florida and Georgia? Yeah, there's a lot of great ones down there. So I want to talk a little bit more about the different ones you visited maybe a little bit later, but do you know about how many lighthouses you visited so far, Guinevere?
I've seen about 15 lighthouses. I'm pretty sure 15 or more, but I loved seeing every single one of them. It's
always, for me, even I've been doing this for like almost 40 years. It's still a thrill when I see a new lighthouse. I get excited. I think my heart beats a little faster. It's just so much fun. It's so exciting. So you have 3 other kids, is that right, Heather?
Yes. Yeah, Gwen's the oldest.
Are any of the other kids interested in lighthouses?
My 2-year-old, my youngest, he gets really excited when he sees one. He'll point to it and he'll say, "Mommy, lighthouse, lighthouse." And he points to it and he gets really, 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 really hot. Like he gets excited when he sees them.
He loves them.
Yeah, I think it's genetic. You pass
I think it is. Or he's just used to seeing them all the time from us, so he just knows, oh, they're gonna love this, but it'll come naturally to him when he gets older.
That's great. So again, I do want to talk a bit more about this later, but I want to talk a little bit about a couple of events that are coming up, and then we're going to introduce our guest interview for today. But I do want to talk more about your lighthouse visits a little bit later. So before we get to the interview, Guinevere, could you help me tell everyone about a lighthouse event that's coming up in a couple of weeks?
Sure. On Saturday, November 25th, an annual holiday lighting of Nubble Lighthouse in York, Maine will take place. As the sun sets, everyone counts down. The lighthouse comes alive with thousands of Christmas lights. The event also includes Santa and a bake sale.
It's only about a half hour from where I live. I go to Nubble pretty often, and I've been to that event a couple of times, the Christmas lighting of the Nubble. It's always a lot of fun. So anybody around there, I'd recommend going to it. I understand you might be coming to New England next year. Is that right? Maybe you get to see Nubble Light.
That's on our list.
Uh-huh.
Excellent. Yeah, you definitely want to see Nubble. It's one that you don't quite get to. You drive to a park and you look across a couple 100 feet of water, but it's like the perfect postcard view of a lighthouse. So I know you're going to love that when you get to see it.
I can't wait to see it in person.
So there's one more event I'd like to tell people about. Guinevere, could you help me out with that?
Also on Saturday, November 25th, will be the annual holiday lighting of Montauk Lighthouse. The event begins around dusk with free hot chocolate and live holiday music. And the main event is the lighting of the lighthouse and keeper's house with thousands of lights.
I don't know if you've seen any pictures of that. It looks amazing with all those Christmas lights on it.
It's so pretty.
Everything's all outlined with white lights. It's a great lighthouse. I just visited there the first time in May. So I know there are also other Christmas season lightings at lighthouses around the country. We'll try to mention some of them in the podcast, I think, next week. So for now, let's get to today's interview. Guinevere, can you help me tell everyone about Bodie Island Lighthouse and our guest today?
Sure, Jeremy. Bodie Island is a long, narrow peninsula at the northern part of the Outer Banks. In North Carolina, the original Bodie Island Lighthouse was built in 1847 in a location that is now underwater. The tower was abandoned in 1859 due to its poor conditions. The second lighthouse was an 80-foot tower built in 1859, but it was destroyed in the Civil War.
The 160-foot brick lighthouse tower that stands today was constructed on the Roanoke Sound side of the peninsula in 1871. A duplex keeper's house was also built, and a powerful first-order Fresnel lens was installed in the lantern.
Most of the light station's property was transferred to the National Park Service in 1953. A restoration of the keeper's house was completed in May in 1953. The building now serves as a ranger's office and a visitor center of Cape Hatteras National Seashore.
Carolyn Wellman is an interpretation park ranger for the Cape Hatteras National Seashore, and just a few weeks ago I visited Bodie Island Lighthouse for the first time and got to speak with Carolyn in her office upstairs in the historic Keeper's House. So let's listen to that conversation now. I am actually inside the historic Keeper's House at Bodie Island Lighthouse, which is very exciting. I've never been to the Outer Banks before today. So this is a thrill for me to be one of the nation's most famous lighthouses. And I'm here with Carolyn Wellman, who is an interpretive park ranger for the Cape Hatteras National Seashore. Carolyn, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thanks for your hospitality and hosting me here today.
You are so very welcome, Jeremy. It's a pleasure.
Well, it really is great to be here on such a beautiful day.
It really is a beautiful day. It's one of the nicer days we've had. Humidity's low. It's 65 degrees. The sun is shining. Blue sky. It's just beautiful.
I'll take this anytime. Absolutely. So I want to get into the lighthouse, obviously, but if we could, I'd like to start with a little bit about you, about your background. Looked like you had a background of being at some other parks before you came here. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I certainly can. I worked at Acadia National Park for 2 summers. Then I went to Zion National Park for 3 summers. That's out in Utah. Mm-hmm. Acadia was in Maine.
Yeah.
And then I went to Olympic National Park, and I worked in the Hoh Rainforest in the state of Washington. Mm-hmm. And then last summer, I was at Rocky Mountain National Park on the western side.
Wow. You get around.
I do. It's been some amazing journeys and beautiful parks I've worked at.
Acadia National Park is someplace I know really well. Mm-hmm. I've spent a lot of time there. I was just in Bar Harbor a few weeks ago. Yes. Didn't get into the park on that day, but took a cruise around it. And so,
wonderful.
It's great to see it from land or water. It's such a beautiful place.
Yeah, definitely experience.
Yeah. Was there anything in particular that brought you to this job here, to this place?
Well, when I don't remember it because I was very little, but when I was, 3 to 6 years old, my family would come down here to the Outer Banks and vacation. And so I have some fun pictures of me flying a kite on the beach and just hanging out in the water. And it was just really special to be able to have the opportunity to apply and get a job working here at Cape Hatteras National Seashore.
Yeah, well, that's cool that you have that background. Were you or are you a lighthouse buff, would you say?
I think I am now.
I can understand that.
Yes.
Do you try to visit other lighthouses when you're able to?
When I was working at Acadia National Park, I would go to the
Bass Harbor?
The Bass Harbor, yes, lighthouse all the way on the southern end of the Mount Desert Island. So
pretty puny compared to this one.
Very small.
But very picturesque.
Very picturesque. It's that iconic view of the lighthouse on the rocky
from the rocks,
coast.
yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the iconic ones. So back to Bodie Island Lighthouse. First of all, am I saying it properly? Bodie Island?
You are saying it correctly. It is Bodie Island Lighthouse.
Mm-hmm. As I'm sure our listeners know, it's spelled Bodie, which I think most people would automatically think is Bodie. Mm-hmm. So where does the name come from? Do we know why it's pronounced Bodie instead of Bodie?
That's a great question. Folklore is this whole area of the Outer Banks is nicknamed the Graveyard of the Atlantic from the huge amount of sand shoals that are very shallow that can cause a lot of shipwrecks that have happened a couple hundred years ago and can still happen to this day. So one of the nicknames for the Outer Banks is called the Graveyard of the Atlantic. And so the bodies that may have washed up to shore is kind of where one of those names for Bodie Island may have come from. But the more likely version and a little more historic is there was a family that had the last name of Bodie. So an old family name that came from here.
Do we know anything about them for sure, or is that just kind of speculation?
That's kind of speculation. It's all kind of very up in the air. There's a couple different theories, but so you can pick which theory you like best, if it's a family name or if you like the bodies washing up to shore. So
yeah, I think most people would probably like that one better.
It varies from visitor to visitor that I chat with.
Yeah. And another question about the name, why is it called Bodie Island when if you look on a map, it's actually a peninsula, not an island?
That was just the name of the whole area, because there's P Island that was south of us, but it is all still very interconnected. But at one point, it could have been an island with all the hurricanes that have, were consistent moving the sands. And Oregon Inlet, which is about 1.5 miles further to the south of this location, wasn't there, a couple hundred years ago. So, so just with weather and oceans can definitely vary different things. So it could have been an island once upon a time.
Yeah. Well, a place like this, the Outer Banks, kind of like Cape Cod in New England, so they're works in progress.
They are, yeah.
They're always changing.
Always changing.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit, well, you kind of said it being the graveyard of the Atlantic, but anything else about this particular location, why a lighthouse was built here?
Oh, certainly. So it does go kind of into the graveyard of the Atlantic and the sand shoals that I mentioned. So we have two major currents that come up and down this coast. So we have the Labrador current coming from the north, and then we have the southern current, which is the Gulf Stream coming from the south. And basically where these two currents combine is right here along the Outer Banks. So they're bringing lots of sand along with them, and they create something called the Diamond Shoals, which is this huge expanse of very shallow sand that is in constant movement. That can cause a lot of shipwrecks. So this location for the Bodie Island Lighthouse is meant to provide a warning light for the folks that are sailing further south to avoid getting stranded on those diamond shoals. They actually have to go further east, so then they can go further south to avoid those shoals. So that's kind of basically is a warning light to be like, hey, you don't want to get stuck.
Sure. I think there was a lightship out on Diamond Shoals at one time.
I believe there is, yes.
Yeah, there was anyway, historically. Yeah.
That's right.
So Bodie Island Lighthouse is one of the kind of classic tall brick towers. There's a few of them in North Carolina and along the East Coast and other places, but I think this area is especially known for them, and Bodie Island is one of the most famous. 160 feet tall, is that accurate?
It's about 167 feet tall and 8 inches.
Oh, okay.
But depends on where you're measuring it. So if you're talking from the ground all the way to the very tip of the lightning rod at the very top, is that 167 and 8 inches.
Has somebody measured that recently to make sure
I
it's
think
correct?
it was with laser.
Right.
I think
Okay.
within the last 10, 20 years, it was a laser measurement is where they got that more specific.
Yeah. It's a little easier to do those things now.
Yes, a little easier.
I think they used to use maybe string to do that.
Might have been some string. Yeah, it's a lot
And
of string.
do we know, it's a brick tower, do we know
Yes.
approximately or do we know exactly how many bricks were used in it?
Approximately, based on my readings, it's about 1 million bricks that they brought to build the lighthouse. Wow. That's a lot.
That's a lot of bricks.
Yeah.
Do you know where they came from?
They came from Maryland. Baltimore, Maryland is where all the bricks came from. But they would have been, there were no roads. This was a very remote area, so there were no roads during that time when this lighthouse was being built in 1871. So they had to bring all those bricks in by ship and then smaller boats to get actually to the area. So very remote location.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you more about that in a moment, but since we're on the subject of the tower itself, it's got a cast iron stairway, right?
That's correct.
How many steps?
There are 219 steps all the way up to the top from, we like to say, from the brick all the way up to the balcony.
I don't want to think too much about that because I haven't climbed it yet. When we finish speaking here, I'm going to climb it. I climbed Assateague Lighthouse in Virginia yesterday and Currituck Beach Lighthouse here on the Outer Banks just a couple hours ago. So my knees are getting a workout, but I can't be here and not climb it.
Exactly. So. On a beautiful day too. Yeah.
yeah. At least it's not super hot.
True.
Yeah.
That makes it a little more uncomfortable.
Yeah. So one more thing about the tower itself. Why does it have black and white bands?
That's a great question. The reason for the lighthouse to have black and white bands is it's something called a day marker. The lighthouse is used as a day marker. So the lighthouse board, so when the lighthouses were being constructed back in the 1800s, they determined that the colors red and white and black were best seen against a bright blue sky. So the black and white bands were just the color pattern that that the lighthouse board decided to do this lighthouse. There's a lighthouse to the south of us, 40 miles south. It's the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. They have a red base, but they have black and white bands, but it looks like a barber pole. They're diagonal, or like a candy cane.
Yeah. And St. Augustine has the same, in Florida has the same day markers.
Exactly.
Cape Hatteras. But the Currituck Lighthouse here on the Outer Banks, where I just was, is unpainted brick, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
I guess leaving it like that is its own day mark. In a
exactly.
way.
Yeah, because it's still kind of that rusty red coloration. So it can still, it's part of that, that red, white, and black. So it'll still be easily seen from the ocean.
Yeah. It's interesting, the red bands. There are 3 lighthouses I know of in the country that have red and white bands. That's West Quoddy Head at the easternmost point of the U.S. in Maine.
Okay.
And Assateague Lighthouse in Virginia, which I visited yesterday.
Okay.
And Sapelo Island Lighthouse in Georgia, which my wife and I visited 2 or 3 years ago. So I think I've seen all 3 of them. But if somebody listening can think of another lighthouse in the country with horizontal red and white bands, let me know, because I think that's all of them. But they do stand out well, especially in areas where there's snow. The red stands out well in the back. With that background. So let's talk a little bit about the human history of the place. First of all, was there a principal keeper and assistant keepers here when it was active?
Yes. So the lighthouse was first lit on October 1st, 1872, and that's when we had our first lighthouse keeper. There was a primary lighthouse keeper, and then they had 1 or 2 assistants that would be living in the double keeper's quarters, which is where we're sitting in now. So there were a fair amount of lighthouse keepers that, came through the area, but there was usually a principal lighthouse keeper and 1 or 2 assistants, and they would have their families live here as much as possible, but it's a pretty remote location.
Yeah. How remote was it in its early days? Was it, were they able to travel by land easily to any kind of civilization from here? Or was it mostly by boat?
It was going to be mostly by boat. There could have been maybe some slight roads or some tracks in the sand, but it would have definitely been more by boat than anything. This is a very remote area. There weren't, many vehicles, so it was mostly by horses or by boat, whatever they had available. So yeah, very remote location.
Yeah. Did they have a little schoolhouse locally? Were they, if the kids were homeschooled here at the lighthouse?
Yeah, so if there was a lighthouse keeper that had a family with kids, the family would live with the lighthouse keeper during the holidays or more during the summertime. But in the winter and fall during school season, there was a small school on Manio, which is on Roanoke Island. Or they would have been closer to the mainland. So if there were kids, there really wasn't any school on Bodie Island. So they would have to live separately away from the lighthouse keeper themselves.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. So as far as the keepers here over the years, are there any especially notable keepers, either in terms of personality or the length of time they spent here, just anything at all, any keepers that kind of stand out for you?
Yeah, there's one gentleman that we have a great portrait of here in the visitor center. His name is Peter Gallup. He was a lighthouse keeper here for 28 years. He was the longest standing principal lighthouse keeper that we had here for Bodie Island. So pretty impressive.
Yeah. It is, yeah. There aren't a whole lot who are in one place longer than that, I don't think. And I wonder if there's any particular incidents that kind of stand out for you, anything that happened with the keepers and families here?
Yeah, so during my readings and learning more during my summer working here, there was one story that kind of stood out to me. I don't remember the names of the kids, but when the kids would come and help out, they would help out with the repairs and repainting and the constant maintenance that went with the lighthouse. But sometimes the kids would play games and run up and down the steps as fast as possible or slide down the stairway. Very different than what we have in operation here today. But the kids would go, and one little boy, he was sliding down, and someone bumped into him, and he bit the tip of his tongue, and it was kind of hanging off about the amount of a tip of a finger. So he ran upstairs to his father, who was a keeper at that time, and at that time he was trimming the wick for the oil lamp, and he's like, all right, come here, and he snipped off the tip of the finger. So basic, tongue, that is. He snipped off the tip of the kid's tongue, and he's like, problem solved. So basic first, lighthouse first aid, very, very basic. There wasn't a lot of hospitals, or you had to kind of learn how to deal with things yourself.
Oh yeah, I've heard similar stories, but that's hard to hear that story.
With the wick trimmer getting your tongue cut off. Oh man,
that's painful. I hope he recovered okay from that.
I think so. Didn't hear anything, didn't read anything else after that. I think it was good.
Right. When we were talking about the lighthouse itself, one thing we didn't talk about is the lens in the lighthouse, and you have a pretty special lens, right?
We do. We have a original first order Fresnel lens. So it kind of, to give an idea, first order stands for, there's different sizes of Fresnel lenses. So the first stands about 12 feet tall, about 6 feet wide, just to kind of give you an idea of the dimensions. But it's all these beautiful glass prisms that will basically enhance and help project the light that we have inside. So what makes this lighthouse actually very special is we still have, like I mentioned before, that first order Fresnel lens, which is actually only 1 out of 10 first order Fresnel lens lighthouses that is still in operation to this day.
In this country?
In the country, yes, in the United States.
Okay.
There's 10.
Okay, I'm running through quickly in my mind.
Yeah.
So I know there's only 2 in New England. Well, anyway, I thought it was a little more than 10, but I believe you. But so it's very, very special. Yeah.
Very special.
Yeah. Is there now an LED lamp inside the lens?
There is not. We are still using incandescent light bulbs. They're about 1,000 watts. They're roughly size-wise a couple inches in diameter and maybe about 5 to 7 inches tall, not super close to the light bulbs, but fairly bigger than your average household light bulb.
I think I'm familiar with the bulbs or lamps. The Coast Guard technicians will say it's not a bulb, it's a lamp. I've heard that before.
Okay.
But most of the Fresnel lenses of all sizes, in just the last couple of years, the Coast Guard's been putting these LEDs inside them. There's a particular type that they found before. They didn't want to do that because they found that LEDs, they can work well standing alone, but inside a Fresnel lens, they didn't think it worked very well. But they now have a type they really like that they've been putting in them. So I'm surprised that you haven't gotten one here yet.
I think we're just trying to use up all of our light bulbs that we have, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard anything if the park is planning on replacing, going from incandescent to LED.
What is the characteristic of this light?
2.5 seconds on, 2.5 seconds off.
Yeah.
2.5 seconds on, and then 22.5 seconds off.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm impressed. That's a little complicated to remember.
Yeah.
But it's a white light, obviously. So I know at Currituck, they put one of those LEDs inside the lens, and it was too white. People complained that it was too white, so they had to replace it with they now have a new experimental LED they're using. It's a little softer.
Yeah.
know.
Ours is kind of still that white light, but it does have a slight amber coloration to it in the evening.
Yeah, the older bulbs that you're talking about have more of a warm glow than the LEDs do. Yeah,
yes.
so hopefully you can keep that at least for a while.
I hope so.
But I think they are perfecting the LEDs more. It's my understanding that most of the light station property here was transferred to the National Park Service in 1953, if I have that right.
That's correct.
And then, except for the lighthouse itself, and then the tower itself was transferred to the National Park Service in 2000. And I think the lighthouse for a while there was in pretty rough shape. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it was in some rough shape, and they had to go a big restoration project from 2009 to 2012. There was enough funding that the National Park Service was able to get to help restore it. But there's a lot of work done. Lots of rusted parts. Pieces were falling around the lighthouse, which was not a very safe thing. So when they did the big restoration project, they actually built the white picket fence that you see today just to create a safety buffer zone in case something does happen. But hopefully it's in good shape for quite a while.
Yeah. Now, wasn't there some work done a lot more recently as well?
It was from 2009 to 2000, not that I'm aware of.
Nothing more recent than that?
Nothing more recent.
It looks pristine. It looks like it was just painted.
It does. We get a lot of comments like that from visitors, but no, it's just basically, it's about a half-mile distance away from the ocean, so that might help with the less wear and tear.
Amount of salt
on the
air
paint.
and that kind
Yeah,
of
the
thing.
salt air, exactly.
Yeah, it looks. As we drove up, I said to my wife, "Look how beautiful it looks. It looks like it was just painted." But I wasn't quite sure when it last was.
Yep.
So I'm here on Sunday of Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day weekend, and I understand tomorrow is the closing day for the climbing season here. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Tomorrow, October 9th, will be our last day for climbing. We opened our season end of April, and so we've been doing it since Memorial Day. It was every single day. Before that, from April to Memorial Day, for about a month, we were doing it only a couple days out of the week, just based on staffing. But yeah, we're getting to the end of the climbing season, but we're finishing it up with some beautiful weather.
Yeah. I'm just curious, do you have, I know you have National Park staff, obviously, you and others here, but are there volunteers who take part here as well? Or?
Yes, we have some really amazing volunteers that come here. We have these 3 wonderful ladies that are from Maryland, and they have been volunteering here for 20, maybe even 30 years, helping out with different lighthouses. They've helped volunteer at the Hatteras Lighthouse and further down at Ocracoke Lighthouse, and they're actually here this weekend finishing up our last climbing weekend with us, and they are a wealth of knowledge. So we're so happy to have them here to help us out.
Yeah, that's great. Is it a particular organization? Is there an organization name that works with the Park Service here? Or?
No, it's anyone that wants to, help volunteer with the National Park Service. They usually go on to volunteer.gov, or they might have, a rapport with the ranger that hired them that they've been able to work with, but not a separate organization. It's volunteer.gov, so they work in partnership with the National Park Service itself.
Good. That's good to know. Let me ask you, speaking of the lighthouse climbing season being almost over, it was super windy yesterday. I was in climbing the Assateague Lighthouse in Virginia. It was so windy, and you mentioned it was windy here too. Is wind one of the things that might occasionally cause the lighthouse to be closed?
Yes. So if we do have some high winds or some storms that are rolling in off the coast or upcoming storms, we can feel the effects even though they could be miles away. We sometimes will have to close the balcony if the winds are a steady wind of 35 miles per hour and gusts over 40.
Okay.
So yesterday we were not quite at that threshold, but we still allow people to be able to go and climb and look out our balcony door. But if those wind speeds do reach that point, it's just unsafe because you can really start feeling the wind blowing you around 20 miles per hour, even being up that high. So that's one of the reasons we won't close a lighthouse, but you might be a little bit more limited with your viewing abilities.
Sure.
But it's still an experience to get to go up.
Yeah. I don't know what that wind speed was yesterday at Assateague, but wow, that's like the windiest I've ever experienced at the top of the lighthouse. And you do have to close in the rain occasionally?
So if it's raining, we don't have to close. We'll just give a quick safety message about this metal steps that could be a little slippery. So just making sure everyone is cautious as they're climbing up to the top. But the other time that we might have to close the lighthouse is if we're here in the Outer Banks, so there's heat and humidity, especially in the summer. So if our heat index reaches temperatures, it's over 105 degrees inside the lighthouse, and we have a temperature and humidity gauge that we check every hour. That would have to close the lighthouse just because it's very uncomfortable inside when it's that stagnant and that humid. And then thunderstorms is another big thing.
Yeah.
So we have lots of lightning rods around the lighthouse, but you don't want to be in a big structure like that, especially with the big metal staircase that goes all the way through. So we will evacuate the building if there's any thunderstorm or if there's lightning within a 10-mile radius of our location.
Yeah. Do you know if there's ever been an incident of the lighthouse being struck by lightning?
I don't know the year, but we do actually have a photograph downstairs in our visitor center that some lucky person caught it just right of lightning striking the lighthouse. Yes.
In fairly recent years we're talking about?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's a colored photo, so that...
Not like in the 1800s.
Yeah, I don't think in the 1800s, but I'm sure it's a possibility. It's the tallest thing out here.
Yeah, well, it's not that unusual for that to happen. Another thing that used to happen a lot with these lighthouses, and maybe you know something about this, is that birds often used to fly into them.
Yes, yeah. So when the lighthouse keepers were taking care of the light, they would have big wire mesh actually around where the Fresnel lens would be. So they needed to help protect it, but they would on occasion get geese, Canada geese that would fly in. And some stories I've read is, sometimes the lighthouse keepers and their families would maybe have goose for dinner that night if there was a bird that did fly in. So birds could definitely be an issue, but so far we're okay. It's in the most recent years that I've encountered.
That's good. That's good to hear. Yeah. So I have one final question for you, and this one is for bonus points. Okay, so get ready. And that question is, what have you enjoyed? What do you enjoy most about the work you do here at the Bodie Island Lighthouse?
So one of my favorite things is being up on the top of the lighthouse is very special. I like to say, you have the best view on the island. You can see quite a few miles out, and everyone is so happy to be out that way. And just to share the history of the lighthouse, I never thought that I would be so passionate about lighthouses. So now it's like, ooh, I want to get to all the lighthouses I can. I'm a big lighthouse lover or lighthouse chaser. I don't know what the term is.
Lighthouse nut. And I can say that nut. Because I am one, so I can say it.
That's the term then. All right, lighthouse nut. Yeah, they're just very beautiful. And I had a gentleman earlier this season. We weren't doing climbing that day, but he walked into the base, and he was an older gentleman, and he was in there for 10, 15 minutes, and he walked out, and I could see he was just a very peaceful face, and he's like, your lighthouse is enchanting, and that's always going to stay with me.
Oh, That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very heartwarming.
It is. Well, Carolyn Wellman, it's so great to be here. It's nice to meet you. I appreciate your time and appreciate you hosting me, letting me do this interview in the old keeper's house here. It's a real thrill. And I look forward to climbing. I kind of look forward to climbing the tower.
You can do it.
Yeah. I know I can. So, Carolyn, thank you so much for doing this.
You are so very welcome. Yes, it's been a pleasure.
To learn more about tours at Bodie Island, go to the National Park Service website at nps.gov and do search for Bodie Island Light Station. Bodie is spelled Bodie.
Yeah, and again, that's nps.gov for the National Park Service, and you can kind of find your way to Bodie Island on there. It's a great lighthouse to visit. I really enjoyed visiting there. It's a lot of stairs. I actually climbed Currituck and Bodie Island and Assateague Lighthouse in Virginia all like in 2 days, and my legs are a little tired, but they're all great. You mentioned earlier you visited the Outer Banks when Guinevere was 6 months old. Do you think you might go back there again for a lighthouse trip?
Yeah, actually, I'm trying to decide if we're going to try to hit Michigan this summer or go back to the Outer Banks. We're going to do one together.
Yeah. Well, they're both great lighthouse destinations for sure. I was in the Upper Peninsula last year, and there's a lot of great stuff to see there. Let's talk a little bit more about your lighthouse visits. Of the lighthouses you visited, which one is your favorite and why?
There's a lot of really good lighthouses that I've seen. I'd probably have to say my favorite lighthouse is Ponson Lit. It was hard to go up it, but it was really fun.
What about it do you like especially? Just it's a beautiful lighthouse. I think it's one of the nicest looking towers.
I just like going up it and seeing the really good view. And especially since where it's at, the area around it shows you a good view. It's not just how high the lighthouse is, it's the area around it that gives you a good view.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's got over 200 steps. It's one of the tallest ones.
Yeah.
And I like the way the buildings are laid out around it. And it's nice grass and like trails leading to the different buildings. It's just a really neat place to visit. How about you, Mom, Heather? Do you have a favorite lighthouse that you visited?
I don't want to say it's Portland Head, but it
You
is.
can say it.
It's everybody's favorite. But I think it would have to be Portland Head or St. Augustine. St. Augustine is so pretty, and the view from the top is beautiful. St. Augustine, like the town is beautiful. That's probably one of my favorites for sure.
Well, those are both great choices. I don't know if you want to mention, people can't see it since they're listening to the podcast, but you actually have Portland Headlight somewhere on you there. You're showing it to me on your arm. You have a tattoo of Portland Headlight. Now that's a real lighthouse lover.
Yes, it was one of the first ones my mom and I went to see together as like an adult when you could really appreciate it. I started really appreciating them. It was one of the first ones we saw together. So
there's no place prettier than Portland Head.
No, definitely not. No.
So beautiful. So Guinevere, how about some of the other ones you've really enjoyed? Do you have a couple of other favorites?
Yes, I really liked Tybee, Old Point Comfort, and St. Augustine.
Okay. Tybee's a great one too. It's another really tall one. Is that what you like best about that? The view?
We climbed it all together, like the whole family, like with the babies and the little siblings. I think that was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tybee is a really beautiful lighthouse, in my opinion. It's a really cool lighthouse, and it's definitely a big lighthouse, and it's one of the harder ones to go up on, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I agree. And Sarah Jones, who's the director there, has been on the podcast a couple of times.
We listened to that podcast about Tybee where you interviewed her on the way to Tybee. That was the one we listened to with the kids, so that was kind of cool.
Cool. Then when I was there a couple of years ago, I got to visit Tybee and meet Sarah, and William Rawlings, who wrote a book on Georgia lighthouses. He met me there too. So
and we saw Cockspur.
Yeah.
And we listened to it and talking about little Cockspur, and it's really, I really like it. It's really pretty. That's probably one of my favorites too. It's little, but it's a favorite.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was there, I got a boat ride out with the park ranger, and it was being restored at the time. There was scaffolding around the lighthouse, and I got to climb the scaffolding up the side of the lighthouse. It was a little scary, but fun.
Yeah, we drove as close to it as we could, and we took pictures and we saw it from land. So
Yeah. And the fort there is really interesting too.
We didn't get to go to the fort. They had the road closed to the fort when we were there. So last time, I've been to the fort a few times. She's been when she was younger, but this last time when we went, it was closed.
Fort Pulaski. You can see all the cannonball marks on the wall, right, from the Civil War.
There's a lot of history there.
Oh, definitely. So you mentioned before you plan to come to New England next year, and you were talking about maybe coming around Maine Open Lighthouse Day. Is that right?
That's what we're going to do. That's our plan. We're going to probably drive up the coast a little ways, definitely stop in New Hampshire, and then spend most of our time just driving up the coast of Maine and trying to check off as many lighthouses as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. You know, I love visiting other parts of the country, but my heart is in New England. I've been here pretty much all my life, except I was born in Kentucky, which might surprise people. But where you live is my state of my birth, but I don't remember anything because we left there when I was 3 years old.
Yeah, I think your birthplace was like 2 hours from where we live.
Fort Knox.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. We lived in Virginia for a year when I was small too, but I'm a New Englander, you know.
Maine is the most beautiful place. I love Maine.
Yeah, Maine is my favorite state. Even don't tell New Hampshire or Massachusetts.
I won't. Don't tell Kentucky because it's my favorite too. So.
Yeah. So I have one final question. This is for both of you. Of course, it's for bonus points. You're used to hearing that on the podcast since you listen so much. And the question is, and either one of you can take this first. It's up to you. But the question is, what do you enjoy most about visiting lighthouses?
So what I enjoy most about visiting lighthouses is seeing views. Like I've said before, is seeing the great views, and some are built really close to the oceans. Mine is seeing the oceans really close to them. Like this one time I was on top of a lighthouse after I climbed it, and I was sitting there and I was recording, and I saw very barely, because I was super high, saw a dolphin like jump out of the water and jump back in. So I thought that was really cool. And it's even better if you climb a lighthouse with a friend. That way you can like do it together with them, and they can experience it too with you.
Yeah. Oh, that is a big part of it. The people you visit, you do this with, but wildlife's a big part of it too. I always love seeing the different, whether it's dolphins or different kinds of birds you see at them and so forth. It's a lot of fun. So how about you, Heather? What do you enjoy most about visiting lighthouses?
For me, it used to be just seeing all the different types of lighthouses in the different places and learning the history. But now I really love going with my kids. Like when my littlest, we just took them, their first trip was to Tybee. And when we turned and, you see it out of your car, and my 2-year-old saying lighthouse, and they're so excited. And that's my favorite part about visiting lighthouses, is sharing it with my kids.
Oh, that's great. So I actually do have one more question for you, Guinevere. How did you like co-hosting this podcast for the first time?
I was nervous, but I don't know why I was nervous. It was actually really fun, and I really liked it. It was really fun.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad it wasn't too painful. As I told you before we started, I always get a little nervous doing anything like this. I think it's actually a good sign that you care about what you're doing. You get a little bit nervous. So
finally being able to talk about lighthouses to someone, because no one at my school is really like, ooh, lighthouses as much as we are. So getting to talk about it to someone is really great.
It's like we speak the same language. We speak lighthouse. Yeah. I know not everybody gets it, but a lot of people really, really love lighthouses. So thank you so much for doing this today, Guinevere and Heather. We'll have to do it again. I really appreciate it, both of you. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much.
In next week's episode, we'll return to the Outer Banks for a conversation about Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. before we sign off, do you have a quote for us, Guinevere?
Yes, I do. The biologist Rachel Carson once wrote, "The more clearly we focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we shall have for destruction."
I think that's a great quote. So on that note, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
Let it shine.